Right now, somewhere in Iran, smoke is rising from 4 different provinces at once. Not from one bomb, not from one plane. From a strike so big, so fast, and so coordinated that the group responsible for killing American troops just a day ago is now watching its entire military machine burn to the ground in real time. What you need to understand right away is what this is not. This is not a training drill. This is not a warning shot, fired to scare someone into backing down. This is not a political message dressed up as military action. This is the United States, responding to an attack on its own people with a level of force that most people watching the news tonight are not going to fully grasp until they see the scale of it laid out piece by piece. Here's the roadmap for what we are covering. We are going to walk back to the moment the attack on American troops actually happened. We are going to show you exactly which weapons were used against U.S. forces and how the attack was carried out. We are going to break down the retaliatory strike itself, aircraft by aircraft, so you understand exactly how the American response was built. We are going to give you an honest picture of what is left of enemy forces after this strike, not an exaggerated one. And by the end, we are going to connect this to bigger global events that are unfolding at the exact same time, because none of this is happening in isolation. But before we get into a single frame of footage, before we talk about jets or bombs or targeting systems, you need to understand how we got here. So let's rewind about 18 hours. It started with missiles and drones launched from inside Iran, aimed at American military positions in the Gulf region. This was not a spontaneous move. This was planned in advance. The missiles were loaded with exact coordinates ahead of time. The drones were timed to hit at nearly the same moment the missiles arrived, so that American defense systems would have to choose which threats to stop and which to let through. That is a deliberate tactic. It is designed to overwhelm defenses by throwing too much at them at once. And it partly worked. Not every missile was stopped. Not every drone was intercepted. American service members lost their lives because of that attack. Let that sit for a moment. These were young men and women who volunteered to serve, who were deployed to one of the most dangerous regions in the world, and who did not come home. That is the real cost behind everything we are about to describe. And it is the reason the response that followed was not a small one. Because here is the part that matters most. When you deliberately target American troops, when you plan it out in advance, when you send weapons built specifically to get past American defenses, you're not going to get a strongly worded statement from a government office. You're not going to get a diplomatic phone call. What you get instead is what unfolded over the following hours. Fighter jets clearing the skies, specialized aircraft hunting down radar systems meant to protect key targets, and heavy bombers flying straight toward the facilities responsible for planning and launching that attack. This was not random retaliation. This was not simply hitting whatever target happened to be available. This was a strike built around one goal, tracing the attack straight back to the people and the places that made it happen, and making sure those specific targets could not do it again. The command centers that gave the order, the communication systems that passed it along, the missile storage sites that supplied the weapons. All of it was identified in advance, and all of it was hit within the same short window before anything could be moved or hidden. What we are watching right now is not just a response, it is a message. And in the sections ahead, we are going to break down exactly how that message was delivered, one aircraft at a time. Not everything you have heard about this attack is true, and some of what actually happened is far stranger than the official story lets on. Before we talk about bombs or bombers, we need to talk about why the IRGC decided to attack American troops in the first place. Because the reason behind it tells you something the pictures alone cannot. It tells you that this was not a move made from strength. It was a move made from panic. For 13 straight nights before this attack, American aircraft had been quietly taking apart the IRGC's military machine piece by piece. Not with one big dramatic strike, but with a steady, grinding campaign that most people were not even paying close attention to. Coastal defense positions along the Persian Gulf had already been badly damaged. Radar stations that were supposed to warn Iran of incoming aircraft had been knocked out one by one, leaving entire stretches of coastline blind. Underground storage sites holding ballistic missiles, the ones built specifically to survive an airstrike, had been turned into craters. Command centers where Iranian officers coordinate their forces had been hit again and again. This was not a war being fought in one big battle. This was a slow, methodical takedown of an entire military organization's ability to function. And if you have ever watched something you built with your own hands get destroyed piece by piece while you're powerless to stop it, you have some sense of what the IRGC leadership was feeling in those 13 nights. That is the part almost nobody talks about. Militaries do not usually make their most reckless decisions when they are winning. They make them when they are cornered. And a cornered military, one that is watching everything it spent decades building get wiped out night after night, is far more likely to gamble on something desperate. Attacking American troops directly was that gamble. And from a purely strategic point of view, it was close to the worst decision the IRGC could have made. because it handed the United States every reason it needed to stop holding back. Now let's talk about how the attack was actually carried out, because the details here matter. The missiles used were short and medium-range weapons, both mounted on trucks, so they can be moved from place to place instead of staying in one fixed location. The drones used alongside them were slow-flying but long-range, the kind designed to loiter in the air and strike after other aircraft or ground spotters lock onto a target. Some of these drones were paired with smaller scout drones, whose only job was to fly ahead, find the exact target, and feed that location back to the weapons following behind them. Here is the part that raises real questions. According to intelligence sources, some of the targeting information used against American positions appeared to be more accurate than what Iran's own military is normally capable of producing on its own. In simple terms, someone outside of Iran may have been feeding them better information than they usually have access to. That is not confirmed yet, but it is a thread worth pulling on, and we will come back to it later, because if it turns out to be true, it changes who else might be involved in this conflict. What all of this tells us is that the attack on American troops was not some spur-of-the-moment decision made in anger. It was planned in advance, coordinated across multiple weapon types, and possibly supported by outside help. And yet, despite all of that planning, it still did not achieve what the IRGC needed it to achieve. It did not slow down the American campaign. It did not create room to negotiate. Instead, it gave the United States a reason to stop being patient. In the next section, we are going to walk through exactly how the American military answered that attack, aircraft by aircraft, and why the way this response was built tells you everything about how this conflict is likely to end. What you're about to read is not a list of weapons. It is the story of how 6 different machines had to work in perfect order, in the right sequence, in the right seconds, for this strike to actually work. Every part of this response depended on the part before it. Nothing happened all at once, and nothing happened by accident. It happened in a chain, and if any single link in that chain had failed, the whole strike could have gone very differently. It started with the aircraft, whose job nobody really wants. These are the jets built to hunt radar. Their entire mission is to fly toward the most dangerous part of the sky, the part still protected by enemy defense systems, and force those systems to reveal themselves. The moment an enemy radar switches on to search for incoming aircraft, these jets are already listening. They pick up that signal, lock onto its exact location, and fire a missile that rides that signal straight back to its source. The enemy radar operator turns on his equipment to find the threat, and that decision ends up being the last one his equipment ever makes. This happens in seconds, and it happens while the pilots flying these jets are still sitting inside the range of the very weapons they are trying to destroy. Every aircraft that comes after them owes its safety to what these crews pull off in the opening minutes. Once the radar picture starts to fall apart, the next aircraft moves in, and this one works differently than people expect. It is not just there to drop bombs. It is built to collect information from everywhere at once, from its own onboard sensors, from satellites overhead, from drones flying nearby, from ships out at sea, and from early warning aircraft watching from a safe distance. All of that information gets pulled together in real time and shared instantly with every other aircraft in the strike. In simple terms, this jet is not just fighting, it is thinking for the entire group, turning a bunch of separate aircraft into one connected system that reacts together instead of separately. With the radar suppressed and the picture being managed in real time, the next wave arrives. These aircraft carry long-range missiles built to fly low to the ground, hugging the terrain so enemy radar has almost no chance of tracking them. The mountains and valleys that Iran has relied on for years to hide and protect its missile storage sites become the exact path these weapons use to reach those same sites. The terrain that was supposed to be a shield turns into the route the attack travels through. Then comes the aircraft that decides how this all ends. This is the heavy bomber, carrying weapons built for one job only, reaching deep underground and destroying whatever is buried there. These are not designed to send a message. They are designed to physically remove a target from existence. When one of these weapons goes off inside an underground facility, the pressure, the heat, and the collapse that follows do not leave much behind. The main target for this part of the strike was a command center believed to be responsible for planning the attack on American troops. Secondary explosions from stored weapons and fuel kept going off for hours afterward and were visible from a long distance away. There's one more piece of this that deserves attention because it shows how much modern warfare has changed. Alongside the manned aircraft, autonomous systems were flying ahead of the group, tracking enemy vehicles trying to escape before the strike arrived. In the past, moving a mobile missile launcher or command truck to a new location was often enough to avoid being hit. That is no longer as reliable. Several vehicles were tracked and struck while they were still moving, caught before they could reach a new hiding spot. The speed at which machines can now track and share targeting information is closing the gap that mobility used to provide. In the next section, we're going to look at what is actually left of enemy forces after all of this, and why the honest answer is more complicated than either side wants to admit. Before we celebrate anything, we need to be honest about something most channels won't tell you. This enemy is badly hurt, but it is not gone, and pretending otherwise would be lying to you. Let's start with the real numbers, not the exaggerated ones. Iran's coastal defense network along the Gulf has taken serious damage. Whole stretches of coastline no longer have working radar coverage. Their stockpile of ballistic missiles has been reduced significantly after weeks of steady strikes on storage sites, but intelligence estimates still place their remaining inventory somewhere in the range of 1,500 to 2,000 missiles. That is still a lot of firepower. Their drone production has been targeted repeatedly, but some of that capability likely still exists in facilities that have not yet been found. And beyond their own military, they still have outside support through allied fighters in other countries, groups that can be activated to create pressure in other parts of the region, even while Iran itself is under attack. So the honest picture is this. Iran is weaker than it was 2 weeks ago. It is not finished. And a wounded force with nothing left to lose and no reason to hold back is often more dangerous in the short term, not less. That is why this pressure needs to continue, not pause, because giving a cornered opponent room to breathe usually just gives them time to rebuild. Now here is something you need to know because it changes how big this actually is. There are reports, still being confirmed, that outside intelligence sources may have helped feed better targeting information to the attackers before they struck American troops. If that turns out to be true, it means a major foreign power may have quietly helped set the stage for an attack that killed American service members. The reasoning behind that kind of move is simple. If attention and resources stay locked on this conflict for months, that same power gains more freedom to act elsewhere, in a completely different part of the world, while the world's eyes are looking somewhere else. At the same time, several other events are unfolding that connect back to this same story. In another conflict entirely, a pilot flying a Western-supplied fighter jet scored a confirmed win in the air this week, made possible by better awareness of the battlefield before the two aircraft ever got close. A neighboring country moved decisively this week against a group tied to Iran, striking an airbase used to threaten shipping lanes, a direct response to a call for that group to widen the conflict. Another regional partner has now openly joined strikes inside Iran, showing that the coalition supporting this campaign is bigger than expected. And one more country has now formally labeled this group a terrorist organization, opening the door to new financial restrictions that will make it harder for them to move money and rebuild. Now, let's put the bigger picture together because there are really three things happening at once here, and they all feed into each other. First, the military math is brutal for the attackers. Every missile they fire costs them money and time to replace, and every time they fire, the response destroys even more of what made that missile possible in the first place. That exchange cannot be sustained for long. Second, this group's power was never just military. It runs a large part of the country's economy, and with trade routes blocked and financial channels being cut off one by one, that economic base is starting to crack. Third, and this is the part people miss the most, the story this group has told its own people for decades, that no outside power could touch them, is falling apart in real time. And a government that loses that story starts losing control from the inside. So here is where this leaves us. Does the pressure keep building until there is nothing left to fight with? Does the group behind this attack try something even more desperate, or do they quietly look for a way out? And does the outside involvement in this attack eventually force a response of its own? Let us know what you think happens next. If this breakdown helped you understand what is actually happening, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone trying to make sense of this conflict.